What is it?
Well, it's called a randomizer, and it's fitted to the guidance systems and operates under a very complex scientific principle called potluck. Now, no one knows where we're going. Not even the Black Guardian.
Not even us.
Hello, welcome to the Randomizer Podcast, Episode 6. I'm Tim.
And I'm Charles.
And this week we have spoiler warnings as usual for the latest episode of Doctor Who, which for us is Praxeus, and for all Doctor Who that preceded it. Also a spoiler warning too for Gareth and Northallerton. Everybody knows, mate. Everyone. So after the big events of the Fugitive of the Judoon, we completely ignore them and enjoy instead a kind of very glamorous holiday in Mauritius and other places.
I had a few issues with the episode.
You surprised me.
I like to surprise. I mean, it looked fantastic. It was really well directed. The effects looked good, the virus, etc., etc. But it just seemed to run out of steam, and a lot of it didn't particularly hold together well. One of my issues was the blogger, for a start. I mean, they come to that river or whatever, it's been drained, it's an absolute dump. Even the girl that ends up dying says, oh, we're not camping here, and they camp there. Now, who in their right bloody mind would camp in the middle of a dump? They could have walked about 500 yards and just camped somewhere that didn't have a pile of rubbish at it. That was a bit weird. Fair enough. But also, the blogger that survived really didn't seem to give that much of a shit about her mate. But she was so self-absorbed. But then again, a lot of YouTubers may well be. So maybe it was a good representation of a YouTuber. I don't know. YouTubers, if you're listening, no offence, okay?
I mean, it's this idea of saying what you think and putting it online.
That's what we're doing. We're just doing a stream of consciousness.
Note to self-explain.
Oh my God.
irony to Chaz later.
Oh, damn. We're self-absorbed.
That could be a Doctor Who monster, don't you think? The self-absorbed love.
Yeah, it could be. As long as we had Peter Katie play this one.
Oh, God. Well, I think you're full of it. I think it's a lovely episode. You're being so unfair on the kind of dramatic exigencies of getting the plot moving.
Oh, I've got more.
I'm sure you have. But the pace of this one is crammed full, so it's weird that you say it was running out of steam, especially when you were going on about wanting it to be a two-parter. So
I'll explain.
Go on then.
It takes a while to find out who the enemy is. When we find out who the enemy is, there's no real massive motivation behind it. Yes, I understand they're sort of, trying to find the cure for this virus, etc. And the virus is a great plot mover. But like I say, it felt like it ran out of steam, but it also felt like you could have expanded so much more and given it a two-parter if you'd have put in something a bit more threatening. It just didn't feel right, because if you'd have put the Sea Devils in, it would have been a fantastic story for them. I mean, the Doctor even mentions the Autons. You could have used that. The thing is, this is a Doctor Who story. I know it had a message, and it wasn't hammered home, the way that Orphan 55 was. I just wasn't satisfied with it. This could have been absolutely fantastic. It just didn't gel for me. The look of it, everything else is great. The companions, Chaz had a hell of a lot to do, although she made some very weird choices by just following someone who is in breathing apparatus to, wherever they're going.
I heard that beautifully put by someone on a forum I read. He said, oh, look, these aliens with breathing apparatus clearly can't breathe in this atmosphere. It just teleported away, presumably to where it can breathe. Shall we follow it? What, us without breathing apparatus? Yes, us without breathing apparatus. Let's follow it.
Exactly.
I know, I was kind of just slightly yelling at the TV at that point. Very, very lucky, yes. But it was great that she had more to do.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that you could have expanded that plot, made it a lot more interesting, made the virus a bit of a bigger threat, because really it was only contained to a few people.
It was planetary.
But it wasn't.
Yes, it was. That was what they were trying to do at the end. I don't get your problem with this.
Yeah, we went to South Africa, Mauritius, but you had about 3 people. It could have done with the involvement of an organisation like the World Health Organisation or unit or whatever. That's what I'm saying about expanding it. Why didn't one of the companions contract? That would have made it a hell of a lot more interesting. I watched it a second time and I was struggling because I was really, really bored. This one just didn't hit it for me. Maybe a viewing in a couple of years or whatever, I'll completely change my mind. But
well, after we've shone some colourful lights in your face and given you kind of personality adjustment, I think that should do it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get it, man. I don't. It's like, this was probably my favourite episode all season.
oh god, no.
I think it was. I just, on sheer pace and excitement, it was unrelenting in a good way. I think, by and large, there was no really heavy-handed stuff. The only pause I had was when the kind of environmental topic reared its head again, but it didn't go all Orphan 55. Just sort of got that in and got moving with things. And there was a global threat, there was jeopardy. The companions seemed to work better by being split up and paired off with different people. The blogger, yes, it was a bit weird that she was all kind of au fait after her best mate was suddenly exploding. But also, you're caught up in a sci-fi plot, you're running down corridors, you don't have time to stop and grieve. It had room for the reflection on the relationship between the two characters, the astronaut and the cop. That nice scene on the beach with Graham. Graham was doing lovely stuff in that scene. You're right that Ryan's being kind of left in the dust by the other two, especially now Yaz is getting some work to do. There was another couple of odd notes that the guy who got eaten by the birds on the beach was completely unremarked and unremembered. But partly that's the pace of things, It's not, by far, it's not the first time in Doctor Who's long history that a smaller role has copped it and been completely ignored. You just expect better from this era, acknowledging the humanity of the smaller parts as well.
To me, it's basically less than the sum of its parts. It had a lot of good elements. It just didn't gel together very well for me. If you're going from lowest to high, I would rate it Orphan 55, Praxeus, and then Nikola Tesla, and then Skyfall and Judoon.
No, I loved it. I was gripped. I was thrilled all the way through. I think we were talking about how it would be nice, like with the Rachnaut, to have just one line acknowledging the similarity, but with the Skithra and the Rachnaut, it would have been nice in this to have one line acknowledging the somewhat earth-shattering or universe-shattering events of the previous episode.
The previous episode led directly into this one, so hence that's why everybody was already mid-plot, as it were.
True, but not without a kind of pause for planning and division of labour, because we come into the episode, sure, hard on the heels of the three locations being set out, but everybody's off at some place with their job to do.
Ironically, that was one of the things I really liked.
No, it was great. It's sort of like, we're here now, we're here now, and then bringing those threads together was nice. I really loved it. I thought there were some weak points for sure, and I've only watched it once, so I'm going absolutely on first impressions. And it's almost a week since it was on, so my poor tired brain is no doubt forgetting all the horrible flaws in it.
I wouldn't necessarily pay too much attention to my opinion of it.
Okay.
I just, as I say, it's a very personal opinion. From what I've read, most people seem to love it, and I'm really, really happy about that. I am genuinely very happy if people like it. I don't have this thing that just because I don't like it, everybody else should feel like that.
Well, I totally feel the opposite. It's like that music thing we talked about last time, that, I don't see why this doesn't just reach you the same way it reached me. I mean, it's not the greatest work of art I've ever seen by a long chalk, but it's just strange to me.
Well, to me, that sort of thing that, everybody should like it is that sort of creeping element of fandom.
Fandom orthodoxy.
Nobody can criticise The Deadly Assassin, for example. And if you dare to criticise it, you're like a fucking heretic.
Yeah, or Time Lash, anybody who says a bad word about that.
Exactly. I will put them to death.
I had a ball watching the episode, and that's what I want from Doctor Who now. We've talked about this a few times, just being excited by it. And I'm sure I will kind of go, yeah, okay, once I sort of look at it more. I think it's also, I'm feeling slightly chagrin of the buzzkill. That it's just like, I would love it for us both. I think we were like this with Spyfall, part one at least, weren't we? We were both like, woo, it's great.
Yeah, I mean, it is fantastic when we both love it. I definitely get that, because you kind of have this excitement about talking about it. And if you've got one that really loved it and one that, I mean, don't get me wrong, I didn't hate it. I have to keep saying this. I didn't hate it. It just, as I say, didn't particularly gel as well for me. But I mean, there's so many good elements to it. I mean, it looks absolutely fantastic. Cinematography, direction, those beautiful shots of the beach, etc., etc. Lovely. Acting, great throughout. Really nice characters, the astronaut and the cop, etc. And although I was disappointed in the sort of reveal of the villain, I thought she was good doing what she was doing.
Well, Suki's not really the villain. She's an antagonist for a while, but
Yeah.
you know, maybe that's part of the issue.
I think
there isn't a direct focused bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's Doctor Who. You kind of need some.
But there was something. There was this global threat, and it was just not embodied in a way that sometimes the show does in a really kind of clunky way. I mean, if you look at like Invisible Enemy, when your virus in this case is embodied by a giant space prawn.
Personally, that was something that I was thinking about, and I enjoy Invisible Enemy more than that, even with the giant space prawn, because it gives you a sort of focus.
Something for the Doctor to spar with, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. You can't really argue with a virus that has no face, as it were.
Well, you know where my mind's gone now? That episode of Red Dwarf where Lister is infected with the sentient virus and it's got this kind of cheesy DJ voice. Hey, welcome to your death.
Yeah, exactly.
But natural disaster is a theme of the season. This is also, maybe it's a modern point that there isn't always a clear-cut villain.
That's
a difficult point.
It's
But
not.
why
really
not?
Doctor
Why can't
Who.
it be?
Because the whole point is to be entertaining. Yeah, okay, you were entertained. Entertaining and have some sort of antagonist, a proper antagonist. That's basically
Who
how
writes that
Doctor
rule?
Who's always worked.
That's...
Oh.
I know you're not a regressive oldie and so
I'm
it's not proper
not,
Doctor
I'm
Who anymore.
not.
I know
do-
you're not that,
yeah.
but that's the argument of that.
Well, that's fair enough, but I can sort of do a lot of things with Doctor Who, but if I'm watching it and I'm bored because it could have been easily fixed, that annoys me. My entire sort of reaction to it was meh.
So I think to cheer me up, we will ask Dr. Schultz a question.
We must ask the doctor.
The show has often dealt with the subject of black holes. Of course, the Time Lord's power is based on harnessing the energy from black holes, and in The Three Doctors, the Doctor is sucked into an alternate antimatter universe on the far side of a black hole, where they are confronted by Omega, the renegade Time Lord. So, welcome, Dr. Schultz. Can you tell us about the scientific research behind black holes, and whether there's any kind of reality to the idea of an antimatter universe, a sort of inverted domain of this strange and dangerous antimatter?
Well, of course, this is completely implausible.
Thank you, Dr. Schultz. That's fascinating.
Yeah, do you know what? I think I'd like a second opinion.
A man is the sum of his memories, you know, a Time Lord even more so.
So this is the part of the show we call Your Cheatin Memory, where we randomly select an episode from the vast history of Doctor Who, and then we sort of burble about it for a few minutes based on what we can remember, and then we go away and watch it, and then burble about it some more. So last time we were, let's say, delighted to select an undisputed classic of Doctor Who, one of the greatest shows in the... Oh, no, hang on, it was Time Lash, wasn't it?
Yes!
Oh, we had such fun. And so Time Lash, for those of you not familiar with classic Doctor Who, is a Colin Baker story, and it's regularly chart-topping as the worst story of all time. Yeah, I mean, what are its contenders? The
Oh, Time in the Rani.
Time of the Rani,
Horns of Nimon.
Horns of Nimon,
Twin Dilemma.
Twin Dilemma, poor Colin.
Orphan 55.
We are starting a swear jar for Orphan 55 every time we mention it. We're going to be rich, man.
Yeah.
So we sat down and we put ourselves through the Time Lash, and it was great fun, I think.
Oh, God, I loved it.
It was interesting.
So cheesy.
One of the things we were talking about was the fact that when we're watching an episode that disappoints us and feels bad, like, well, for me, just the last 2 minutes of Orphan 55, for watching that now in the current series, it feels a lot more dangerous. It feels more serious, more threatening, because we want the show to be good and we want the show to be well received and to continue. But to watch an episode that feels like it's mishandled feels like a threat to the future of the show. Whereas, 30 years later, Time Lash, which would have been all of those things at the time, is now like a glorious, bumbling, joyous romp of nonsense. And, well, where to begin? Paul Darrow?
Paul Darrow. It's not even sort of subtle. No, Paul Darrow's never subtle, let's be honest. But he has a Richard III haircut, and he is so doing Richard III in this, and literally chewing the scenery. He's blending the scenery and having it as a milkshake. It is just delicious.
The scenery does suffer from being kind of featureless white walls, but only Paul Darrow's teeth marks give it a bit of texture and depth,
of course the bit where one of the Malins, he's at a console and he pulls a bit of the console off and tries to sort of hide that he's done it.
It's some lovely covering up by the actor who's working this quite cheap looking console. And I had a sort of premonition, I'm not sure if I've noticed this before, but I just sort of thought there was something ginger about the way he was handling this sliding control. And then, ironically, in one of the better lit sets, it's a gloomier room, he just pulls the poor lever clean off and just sort of...
It's delicious.
Oh.
It really is delicious. He probably fed it to Paul Darrow.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Maybe it'd been nibbled a bit already.
Oh, good.
Yeah, apart from the sort of Borad's chamber and some of the other areas, it does suffer from that 80s thing of overlighting.
It kind of looks like a sort of Premier Inn sort of conference room or something.
The delegates from the sackcloth and pyjamas party are something.
Jesus, everybody was in pyjamas or beekeepers outfits.
The beekeeper guards were one I'd forgot. You can see it's a sort of cheap and effective kind of way of having anonymous guards, but it does just sort of beg the question of where are all these bees?
Oh, jeez. And of course that android. I mean, the android is partially genius and just an absolute nightmare and
I'm kind of fond of it. I think it kind of works in a just wrong way. It's sort of the blue face and the kind of gold blonde wig is just a sort of strange combination.
And the voice, oh my god, the voice.
You should have done this whole segment in the android voice.
Thank you, Borad. It's so insane.
And we noticed this tiny little bit where it has a sort of little smile. It's like, it's never made anything of, but it just sort of, it walks off shot with a little smirk.
Smirk comes across his face. I know, it's... Oh.
But nothing ever came of it, and nothing blew up or exploded. There was no smirk without fire.
Oh,
sorry.
Borad. We had like a false Borad, which was Dennis Carey as a sort of animatronic puppet or whatever.
Before he went on to become Archbishop, right?
Yeah. But then we had the Borad, as it were, and it turns out he's a clone. And then we had the Borad again.
Yeah.
And it was sort of similar to the end of later in the season Revelation, where it's a clone Davros. I mean, in the same season, 2 stories apart.
Maybe. I'd never made the connection before, possibly because it sort of doesn't work.
Oh, I mean, it makes no real difference anyway. Yeah. The Borad's hilarious as well, because when he describes his condition, he was down with the Morlocks, which are these sort of horrific, sort of wormy, dinosaur-y creatures, and the gas was released and it excited the Morlock and I nearly fell off the chair. The only thing I could think was that he was fucked to death by a Morlock.
They do have extremely long necks and not much else, so
It's hilarious. The only thing I can say about it in a sort of more serious note is Perry. Perry is treated abominably in Doctor Who.
By everybody.
I mean, she's always at the sort of behest of some leering baddie. Sharis Jack is sort of pawing her all the time. The Borad's doing the same. He basically says he's going to mutate her. Oh, God. Yeah. I mean, even when she's introduced, there's nothing wrong with a bikini or something, but it's so gratuitous. They're putting her in really skimpy outfits.
The sort of character arc for Perry is more of a kind of character zigzag, really, but at least in this episode, I did think one nice touch was that she got to do some of her botany. There's plants in the planet that she gets to be interested in.
Yeah,
have a character moment about. It was very slight.
Very slight.
But it sort of paid off when she then uses one of these acid-spitting plants to escape from one of the guards coming at her?
Yeah, although, as I say, that initial discovery of the plants gets upstaged by Paul Darrow.
Shoving the plant in the Doctor's face.
Yes. The Borad, the most luminous force in this part of the galaxy. And it's as if he's then doffing his hat. He's absolutely hilarious. My love for Paul Darrow has no bounds. I mean, he was obviously Avon in Blake 7. That's what he's best known for. And yes, it's a very overplayed character, but it's so brilliant. He is absolute screen gold whenever he's on. He's the most interesting person in the room.
He does rise above a rather dull guest cast. I mean, I found Vina was just sort of gliding through the show without ever managing to do more than just sort of play the one note of this character.
She literally glides through the TARDIS at one point.
Yes, that was a decent effect, actually.
Yeah, it wasn't bad.
The time lash itself, I think they must have planned to have more of a visual effect on the camera because there is actual tinsel all over the interior of that set.
Yeah, I mean, all the tinsel is banished to the time lash, so they obviously, you know, it's always winter but never Christmas on Karfel.
When the Borad banned Christmas, they had to chuck all the decorations in the time lash. That's clearly one in it.
Oh, God.
Certainly there's probably a load of balls down there somewhere.
Oh, definitely a load of balls somewhere.
All credit to the cast, especially Colin Baker, for doing their best. It was sort of like the worst disco climbing wall ever.
Props to Colin Baker and Nicola Bryant for their seatbelt acting in the
Oh
TARDIS.
my God, I'd forgotten about that.
Christ.
There's a new Who reference to seatbelts, isn't there?
I think David Tennant said something about it, or something. But
oh my goodness!
Of course, that's Herbert.
Lovely Herbert, Lemon Herbert. The comes along and he's terribly sweet and very eager and earnest. And the big twist is that he turns out to be H.G. Wells, Herbert George Wells, author of The Time Machine and The War of the Worlds and early science fiction classics. So again, Doctor Who cheekily claiming to have invented its own genre.
Yeah, well, of course, The Time Machine features the Morlocks and the Eloi.
Yes.
So, you know.
I mean, it's a clever plot in that regard. It's, you know, it's nicely circular. It allows for the kind of inspiration of a historical figure by having an adventure in the TARDIS. He's just so nice.
Yeah, he genuinely is. He's a lovely character, and I remember at the time thinking, wouldn't it be cool if he went with him? Because he sort of reminds me a little bit of Rory in the naivety.
Yes. There's something of Adric in the character as well, I think.
Yeah.
Very young, perhaps, and cheekily just clambering on board the TARDIS and getting on with being an assistant without waiting to be asked.
That was funny when he sort of wanders in.
He's like, hello, what's this? There's a lot of nice little moments in it that are perfectly decent in themselves. It's just like, I don't know, talking of being less than the sum of its parts.
When the Bandrels enter, it's like basically you've got a talking penis on the screen.
I don't see that. The Morlocks are more penile, but the Bandrels have this sort of wrinkly, sort of rattlesnake flapped sort of look. And they're just lit in such a beautiful warm orange colour that they just look really cuddly.
Don't get me wrong, I really like the Bandrels. I mean, I was really looking forward to them coming on screen.
It would have been quite something to see one of those in the studio, but they were probably small puppets, I guess.
Yeah, I would imagine. We should just petition Chibnall to bring the Bandrels
Bring
back.
the Bandrels back. Oh my God.
They could have been the villain in Praxeus.
Really? Yes. Hello, we've come to infest the world with plastic. That was the thing. Running through the whole show was really weird choices for voices. You know, from the sing-song android to the kind of slightly soft-spoken and not really threatening, but we're going to invade your planet Bandrels. And the Borad had this weird vocal trick when he was in his Jeremy Corbyn appearance, and when he was in his dark, sinister villain appearance. He had a dark, sinister villain voice for the one, and then this sort of terribly nice voice for the old man.
It was just an absolute delight, and this is what I really like about this section, because we literally don't have a clue what's coming next. Hopefully it won't be the mutants, because that will cause a conflict of interest.
That's true. We'd have to come up with something.
Yeah.
Well, we'll hear about what you thought about that very shortly.
Oh, yeah.
Time Lash dealt with, and I don't know how we're going to top this, but it is time to switch over to the randomizer.
Look, when I give the word, press the button. The big one? Yes, maybe it works in conjunction with the others.
And let's choose another story.
All right, well, let's try and find out. Now, what could it be?
Cold War. You thought you literally just watched that.
Don't believe I literally did just watch that about 2 weeks ago. No problem. And of course it's another Matt Smith.
Yeah.
This randomizer does love young Matt.
So Cold War, well, in terms of what I remember of it, it's obviously the return of Ice Warrior.
Yes. It's set on board a submarine during the 80s, and of course the magnificent, wonderful, godlike figure that is David Warner. The biggest staple of the 70s, has been in practically everything.
He held a lot of paper together.
He really did. And Ultravox gets a mention in this one. Well, it'll certainly please one Doctor Who fan I know.
I can't look it up, I've got to do it from memory, but I think Tobias Menzies is in the episode as well. A fantastic actor, I'll point him out once we've rewatched. So, Cold War, we are going to get into a submarine, linking us neatly back to Praxeus, of course, which also had a crashed submarine.
Yeah, linking us back to Praxeus, which, you know, I mean, they could have used that. They could have had that sort of, you know, thing with the
Leave
ice
it
warrior,
alone.
you know, and that would have made it better.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I'm trolling now.
You're absolutely just goading me.
So you still challenge me, young man?
Well, it's the challenge section of the show, and finally we get to hear Chaz's thoughts on the mutants. Come on, mate.
Well, I can thoroughly say that I watched it.
Oh, fantastic at last.
Yes, and oh my god, it is so brilliant.
You enjoyed it?
I really, really did.
Oh,
it's
thank goodness.
absolutely fantastic. I mean,
All this time.
I never knew that Donald Pleasance appeared in Doctor Who.
What?
And Tom Baker, before he was cast as a Doctor, apparently he was sort of missing a bit from this one. I sort of take it was like a Dalek cutaway type thing, but and nudity! I'd never seen nudity in Doctor Who. So basically, Donald Pleasance is this professor who is talking about, you know, like experimenting on plants and humans, and he's using his students to sort of create hybrids. I assume it's like a prequel to Seeds of Doom. And Tom Baker is a sort of Igor type character, and it's absolutely amazing. And the effects are gruesome. It's the most horrific Doctor Who story I've ever watched.
And was it kind of all one big long episode?
Yeah,
Rather
I
than,
mean,
say,
they've
a
never done
four-parter?
that before. Yeah, it was about an hour and a half.
Right, yeah, sort of movie length, would you think?
Yeah. Probably.
And is there any chance, perhaps, that what you've watched is not the John Pertwee story, The Mutants, but the 1974 film, The Mutations? Next week, pal.
Oh,
Next week.
damn.
Predictable as ever, Doctor.
So, it's time for Doctor by Doctor, where we randomly select a doctor and then talk about their era. Now we've moved on to paper technology, the dead tree format, so that we can select from doctors that we haven't already discussed. So, Chaz, go for it. Give it a rattle. It's a very convincing sound effect.
It is, isn't it? And it... Oh, God. You've done it so well, haven't you? Doctor number 6.
Number 6.
Which
Hey.
is good, because we've just watched an episode.
I know, we can remember him. Colin Baker. Colin Baker was probably the most unfortunate of the classic Doctors, in the sense of when he came into the show, a lot of choices were made about the characterization and the relationship with the companion that just didn't land well at all. I think the idea was to make him more alien and more brash, less agreeable. So his relationship with Perry, who was his companion for almost all of his era, was frequently argumentative and often just involved scenes of TARDIS bickering, which were really off-putting, I think, even at the time. I didn't enjoy them. They definitely mellowed towards the later times. By the end, it was a very fond relationship, I think. I believe Colin and Nicola Bryant got on fabulously.
Oh, yeah, I mean, they still do, as far as I know. I mean, yeah, it did feel like they were trying to sort of make the Doctor an anti-hero again, with, you know, some of the sort of wilder things of his personality, and of course the costume didn't help.
I have no problem at all with the costume. I really don't. I think it's space clown and it's over the top, but it's not the worst thing with that era. It's not the biggest failing.
No.
It's far too easy to point to the costume.
I'll be honest. I mean, yeah, at the time, I probably thought, oh my God, it was awful, you know. But I mean, I look at it now, I don't even notice it anymore. And
Yeah.
as Colin Baker himself said, he said, well, you know, it's a sort of symphony of bad taste, which was supposed to be his character, and also he was wearing it, so he didn't have to look at it.
And sure, it reflects that choice to make the Doctor more difficult. That's a brave choice, and I think it failed. I think that's probably the trouble, is that the scripts didn't live up to the boldness of that choice.
I agree. I think if it had worked, it would have been fantastic, you know, because it really sort of tried to do something different there with the Doctor and Companion. In Stephen Moffat's Capaldi era, he tried to do the same thing, but a lot better.
Well, with a lot more sort of gentleness and subtlety,
Yeah.
and I think probably the benefit of hindsight as well.
Yeah, of course. Colin Baker is great. I mean, Twin Dilemma is a really interesting portrait of the Doctor. The story is trash, but the Doctor is fantastic in that, and that sort of scene where he literally attacks Perry.
Yeah, that's really
it's
unsettling.
It's very unsettling because you've never seen the Doctor like that before, and he sort of mellows through the episode, to be a bit more stable, but he still has these outbursts throughout his era. I mean, I remember him in Time Lash, bad.
That's my low point for all of Colin Baker's work on the show, is those repeated shouted lines. They're really just awful. And I think he does great stuff with the more sort of meat and potatoes elements of the episodes, but the moments where he has to play nasty, I do think he holds some of the blame. And, in terms of not managing to... I don't know how. The writing's terrible, but I don't know how you can do this. But the only way through that would be the trick that Capaldi manages, which is to throw out the horrible, disinterested alien line, "She cares so I don't have to," but then turn on a dime and be charming the next moment.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably right there,
I mean, it's not fair to Colin. You don't have the text to do that under you, but I'm asking the impossible, I expect. But those moments are just the absolute worst of his Doctor.
I think you can sort of see, obviously, nowadays the person who's in the role has a lot more leeway to do and shape the role better. I don't think Colin got that opportunity. He basically lobbied to mellow it, and I think that's what his plan was to mellow the Doctor. He was even talking about the costume would change over time and so on. Taking it from the beginning, he's in chaos, his outfit is chaos, everything about him is chaos, and over time he sort of becomes more sort of stable as an idea. That would have been interesting. That is really, really interesting idea. I do like it when the Doctor's a bit darker. And up until then, occasionally in Tom Baker's time, we had the odd dark moment, but we didn't have a lot of darkness in Doctor Who until Colin Baker, really.
It's unkindness. And that's the sort of antithesis of the character. Amy says it in The Beast Below, "You're very old and very kind." Okay, she's talking about the space whale, but she's not as well. It's in Fatal Death, "You're far too kind and far too silly." And it's just the nasty streak. There's no trajectory to that. It's just peppered in whenever these ghastly TARDIS scenes happen. And it's a shame because there's so much to love in the Colin Baker era.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, he is absolutely wonderful, especially in the two Doctors. Him and Pat Troughton have such a great rapport.
So where would we go for a favourite in that era? Because for me, I am a big fan of Vengeance on Varos in principle as an analysis of television and the debate around video nasties and violence on television. It sort of undermines itself horribly by having the Doctor make a quip after a guard falls into a bath of acid.
It's a very James Bond moment.
Well, yeah, or Arnold Schwarzenegger.
That is a particularly brilliant story. A sort of Big Brother society where everybody is watched and everybody,
society.
Their punishment they turn into entertainment. They sort of diversify with their punishment video and then sort of broadcast it.
Whenever I visit my mum, her and her husband are sitting watching Judge Judy, and it's not a bloody million miles away, I tell you.
Yeah, I understand. I thought you were going to say something about voting or something. Colin Baker's Doctor got a renaissance with, of course, Big Finish.
Yes, we've talked about it before.
And that really sort of cemented his Doctor as one of the greats. I think it's so lovely to see him be able to do, what he was wanting to do with it and all that, because he had an absolute love. When he was cast, I remember him saying he wanted to be doing it for years, and so I kind of love it when you've got an actor that really, really loves the part they're in. Yeah.
So the Colin Baker era began with the Twin Dilemma, which had annoying twins and giant slugs. I remember being quite struck by the image of the giant slug trails, and it was quite a sort of creepy idea, but don't remember much else about that story at all. What I do remember very vividly was Attack of the Cybermen with the very creepy Cyberman in the sewers, the Black Cyberman, was an innovation at the time for the series.
And of course, that was the return of Commander Lytton from Resurrection of the Daleks, played by Maurice Colburn.
Yeah, a lovely role and a great sort of little two-story character arc for that character. Redemption story, of course.
Yeah, very much. And, of course, another guest star on that
Brian
story.
Glover.
Brian Glover. I love Brian Glover.
I know. It's like, I think of all the bald actors, he and Donald Pleasance, back to that,
who was in The Mutants.
Yeah, he was in The Mutants, that's right, Jesus. Also, the return of the Cyber Controller. It's somewhat tokenistically played by the same actor who portrayed him in Tomb of the Cybermen, Michael Kilgareth. Unfortunately, and not accommodated by the costume, sadly, he's grown something of a beer gut in the intervening years. So it's a decent story. I really
like that story. I loved the scenes on Tellus. I loved the Cryons. I thought they were really interesting. All these elements, you had the thing from the invasion from the sewers, so you had Tomb of the Cybermen, and they were even talking about Mondas, because Mondas was due to come into orbit.
Yeah, of course.
So there was so many things in the air being juggled. Colin Baker, I mean, his era does have a prevalence for violence, the Doctor being violent, but I thought he was particularly good, especially at the end, where you actually saw sort of some real emotion from the Doctor when he's talking about Lytton. He said he'd never underestimated quite as badly as he did Lytton. And I really liked that, because it reminded me slightly of Warriors of the Deep, which is always my favourite ending, especially Peter Davison, because like that story, he looks like he's been put through the ringer in that story, and he looks awful, and there's that crack in the voice. Yeah. And that was really powerful at the time,
It's really rare in Classic Who to have those moments of self-reflection for the Doctor, and they're precious when they happen, I think.
Absolutely.
So with Vengeance on Varos, we've talked about briefly, the Mark of the Rani followed that, and saw the introduction of a new Time Lord character, the evil Rani, played by Kate O'Mara. And this was also filmed in a location called Blist's Hill, which is a sort of open-air Victorian museum in England. I've been there a couple of times. It's a lovely place to visit, and they have a whole kind of shtick with people in costumes, and you go into the bank and exchange your real money for Victorian currency, and then you can purchase things in the various shops around the village.
Can I just ask something? Do they have to always be in character? Are they allowed to break character?
I don't remember.
Because this is a complete tangent.
I love it.
But I have to say it. I remember there's an episode of South Park where they go to like a western village, right? And everybody's saying, what somebody says about mobile. What's a mobile phone? We don't have them in 1872. And then terrorists invade it, and they're all
still stuck in character.
And they're, they want the key to the safe or something, and they say, we don't have no fanity, and people are being executed, and they're still, the guy's going, don't fucking break character for no reason.
So that's the true evil of 0-hour contracts.
I'm so sorry. I had to get that out.
I was never that struck by the Rani, and certainly her return visit at the start of Sylvester McCoy's era didn't do anything to assuage that.
I really liked the Rani. Kate O'Mara done a brilliant performance in that. At the start she was, come on, love, and did bathhouse. And I thought she certainly was a better foil than the Master in that particular story. But of course
they have to bring the Master into it as well, don't they?
I think in that story she's a really, really interesting villain.
I should revisit it, I think. It's been a while.
The other thing is that they've brought the Rani in Big Finish, obviously, because there's a gap to fill. So, but it's Siobhan Redman, who plays the Rani. Now I haven't heard any, but I've got a particular love for Siobhan Redman. I loved her in Between the Lines, The High Life, The Smoking Room. She is a great actress.
So the Two Doctors follows a kind of multi-doctor story, which always has a certain element of rompiness to it. But beautiful return for Patrick Troughton and Fraser Hines as Jamie. A very convoluted and slightly incoherent way of getting them back in, but who cares?
The opening scene is very beautiful because they do it in black and white as well, which I thought was lovely. And of course, they have that second Doctor, Jamie, sort of double entendres that they always say, oh, look at the size of that thing, Doctor. Yes, it is a big one. Pure nonsense, but it's just so great because those two characters feed off each other so well. You know, Jamie really works with the Sixth Doctor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's really great how well he worked. Of all the companions, I'd say the two I would love to see in the new series are Ace and Jamie. I love Jamie as a companion. I love the Second Doctor's era, but I absolutely adore Jamie as a companion. He's so loyal, but he's so funny.
Yeah.
You know, they just have a ball, and you can tell the chemistry between those two actors.
It's got its nasty elements, the story, with the kind of cannibalism theme. Also, we have Jacqueline Pierce in this episode, who played Servalan in Blake 7. She plays an upgraded androgam, Giussini.
Yeah.
And the Sontarans return as well.
Very tall Sontarans for that.
I don't know, it's sort of, you get the impression that if they're a clone race, they've certainly had various different versions, but I guess there's different batches of clones. I liked all the sort of sci-fi stuff about the Kurtzheimer device and the kind of the dangers of dodgy time travel and so on. I think
it was very similar to the ideas in Talons. You know, like the cabinet,
the sort of time travel
Sigma
cabinet
thing, you know. And if it didn't have the right thing, you know, he was mutated.
Messes you up.
It was interesting.
So it made you look like you'd had a date with a Morlock.
Oh dear.
Time Lash followed, we've covered that, talking of dates with Morlocks. And Revelation of the Daleks was the one we've also alluded to in terms of having the double Davros thing slightly.
Yeah.
Its thunder slightly stolen.
That was based on an Evil in War story, and that is one of the better Dalek stories, I would say. It's very interesting. You've got Davros as a spider at the centre of the web, and you've got all this manipulations going on, and basically this whole idea of the galaxy is sort of starving, and you need this food source akin to Soylent Green, you know, which we find out is people, and spoilers for Soylent Green. You find out in this that he is using the corpses that he's not turning into Daleks as a food source of synthetic protein.
That's a great game of Would You Rather.
Yeah,
I've read here it's based on the loved one.
Yeah.
I think the story fails for me with two of the guest cast, Joe Bell and Tassim Becker. Those two performances just didn't sit well with me at all. I found the actors played the parts so bluntly and petulantly, and Tassim Becker's kind of turning at the end. It just feels like the last nasty note in a nasty symphony rather than any kind of shot, because her kind of affection and love for him is played desperately and needily. There's no beauty in it at all. It's a shame.
Yeah, because I mean, unrequited love is very, you know, you can do some beautiful things with that. I mean, it's not a great performance. Clive Swift, who was also in Voyage of the Damned, and he played Mr. Copper, and that was a quite nice performance.
I want to talk about briefly Alexei Sale, who pops up as the DJ in this, and that's a fine kind of comedy cameo. He's quite nice in it. I'm sort of fond of Alexei Sale, so the fact that he's just a bit of a strange character, this DJ for the dead.
I love the way Alexei Sale is now. He's like the grandfather of socialism or something. He sort of looks like Karl Marx now.
The two I wanted to talk about were Orsini and Bostock. So William Gaunt, and it's John Ogwyn who plays Bostock, his squire. And Orsini is this kind of... It feels like he could have had a series of his own somewhere else in the universe. This kind of... I don't know, is he a bounty hunter? He's a knight.
He's a grand knight. He's a knight of the Grand Order of Oberon.
So he's a bounty hunter with a fancy title.
There's basically a wonderful bit where Davros is talking about Orsini, and I think it's Kara says, you know, some common assassin. He says, "There is nothing that is common about Orsini. You know, he is a knight." And it was like the respect from Davros is rather wonderful.
I think William Gaunt makes the character larger than it is on the page in a way, you know, in a good way as well, not in a kind of Paul Darrow way.
Very much. Bostock as well. I mean, the unwashed squire, you know.
Yes, he's Baldrick, basically.
He basically is. And the way he's described here, Bostock is a wonderful squire. He has an aroma of his own. Yes, it's quite a perfume.
Yeah. It's Eleanor Braun as Kara, who of course employs them. Her second Doctor appearance after the cameo in City of Death.
That's right, yeah. And she has her accountant they even get commented on by Bostock. They're like a double act. This is Eric Sayward influence from
Doing
Robert Holmes. I
yeah.
mean, Eric Sayward had a great love of Robert Holmes. He was a good friend of his near the end of his life, and he was obviously taking that Holmes idea, you know, that classic double act that Holmes always shoved into his scripts.
Yeah.
So you had two pretty great double acts in that story.
No, it's definitely a high spot, and it closed out Colin Baker's first full season, season 22. Season 23 returned after a bit of a hiatus.
At the end of season 22, of course, they paused the final line because they were going to say, well, I'll take you to, and it just ends, and it was going to be Blackpool. And the Nightmare Fair with the Return of the Toymaker.
No, it exists as a novel or novelisation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So
And
that
an
whole
audio,
season.
I believe.
Right, I haven't heard that. One of the legendary missing seasons was they had commissioned scripts. What was the second one? Mission to Magnus.
Mission to Magnus.
With
and
Syl.
Yeah.
Oh, that's another great character to talk about.
Oh,
from
yeah, of
Colin
course.
Baker era. In Vengeance and Varos are introduced to Syl, played by Nabil Shaban, who is a sort of small, like slug-like creature and very avaricious in a sort of Ferengi way, long before the Ferengi, actually.
I do believe that Nabil Shaban was the first disabled person to have been cast in a Doctor Who story.
Really? Gosh.
Right as if I'm wrong, you know, I could well be wrong. I mean, he's a fine actor and he created a fantastic character with
Syl's
Syl.
just a treat. He's kind of
He really
gleeful and nasty
Yeah.
and sort of...
And that laugh.
Yeah,
Oh.
great costume.
Yeah.
Brilliant bit of design on that costume as well. And he was due to return in Mission to Magnus.
That's right.
But instead returns in the next season, Trial of a Time Lord.
Yeah.
So after the hiatus, they sort of had a rethink and decided to do a kind of whole season with one overarching theme. It was split into 4 stories officially. It wasn't without its problems. And the trial theme was kind of a nod to the fact that the programme itself was considered to be on trial.
I didn't think about it much at the time. That the more I've thought about it, I thought, that's a bit of, I don't know, self-fulfilling prophecy or...
Putting all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah,
is what it is.
and very risky, I suppose. I like Trial of a Time Lord. I always kind of look at it as one story. I know there's 4 separate adventures, but I do find it interesting, and it has a lot of personal love for me, because our late great friend Kenny Davison, more or less after we'd sort of just become friends, he was staying at mine, and I think I was about 19 or 18 at the time. We spent an entire night re-editing Trial of a Time Lord, because Kenny always thought there was too many trial scenes, so he was like saying, can we do this? And we done it, and he had this video version of it. He was so pleased with it, and then he lent it out to somebody who never saw it again. And he was talking a while ago about, we could redo it again. I went, Jesus, you're kidding. I don't have that amount of patience anymore, you know. I kind of have a lot of personal love for the story, for the memories it gives me. But again, I think Colin Baker's great in it. The stories, the individual stories, the mysterious planet. Oh God, we're going to hear the clink of Orphan 55 again. The mysterious planet with the railway station reveal, etc., you know, which got stolen by a less sort of competent writer in Doctor Who's later years.
Can't believe you're holding up Mysterious Planet as something.
No, it's not that brilliant either. I mean, it's an interesting story. It's definitely not brilliant in any way, but there is some good bits in it. I love the Drathro. I thought the design of Drathro was really cool. Glitz and Dibber is a great combination. Queen Katrika, played by Joan Sims.
Not so keen on her.
It's John Nathan Turner's thing, isn't it, about getting celebs in, you know. I can see his point on that, you know, it's always a good way.
Give him a decent bloody role, at least.
I totally agree. I'd rather have better actors, but his thing was to get bums on seats. And in the season 26 box set Blu-ray, there is, I think it's about an hour and a half profile of John Nathan Turner, and there's a lot of interesting things that you find out, which I did find out through reading that book about him. So
biography.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, you can kind of see why certain things happened, but I still agree, get a competent writer in actually
It's Robert Holmes, but this is not.
It's not his best, and he was ill, and so on. So
it's a shame. It's a kind of a sad ending to a great career, I think. Let's talk about the top of the season, though. It starts with probably the best effects shot in classic Doctor Who. You know, the wonderful motion controls sort of flyover of the spaceship where the trial takes place, and the capturing of the TARDIS in the beam of light, and that was like nothing else that we'd ever seen. It was mind-blowing at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic piece of model work.
Wonderful music for it as well. That was Dominic Glynn's sort of triumphant entry into the
absolutely.
show, I think.
The problem is that I think they blew a lot of the budget on that. It was on screen for 15 seconds. So.
And if they'd stopped there, the show might have continued on for another.
Basically, that's great. But Doctor Who isn't about how it looks.
No.
It's about content, it's about, plot, character.
I don't know if you can sort of weigh up the cost of this against X, Y, and Z in the things. And there's nothing that really sticks out as being, especially cheap looking in the rest of the season. I think the problems the season has were basically Robert Holmes' progressing illness and the fact that his scripts had to be butchered by the Bakers. So Pip and Jane Baker, who wrote Terror of the Vervoids, of which I'm very fond, actually, had to come in and rewrite the very final episode of The Ultimate Foe. And so it meant that the whole climax of this huge arcing season-wide plot was just a complete mishmash and a muddle.
I'm not as keen on Terror of the Vervoids. Of course, it's a murder mystery, sort of, Poirot or Miss Marple or whatever.
The creepy killer plants are really good.
That is a great concept. I did like the Vervoids.
I like the Hyperion as the setting.
Yeah, I mean,
Lan Palfrey.
I think they must have got the idea for the Vervoids for the Mutants episode that I just watched.
Yes, of course.
It's a very sort of bland season. I think the structure tends to fall apart a bit because really you could see that Eric Saward's idea was him and Robert Holmes would more or less collaborate over the series to give it what we now call an arc.
Yeah.
But unfortunately it didn't work. Eric Saward was doing his best and having to get people in at the last minute. I can see why they got Pip and Jane in because they deliver. On time and they're reliable, but I wouldn't say they're great
big
writers.
Doctor Who writers, they're hacks.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's the one thing Chibnall and I agree on probably. But unfortunately, I suppose if you're up against the wall and it's 1 minute to midnight, and you have to sort of just go with it.
But isn't that just typical that a kind of a last minute crisis and no room to manoeuvre sort of just really sealed the fate? Fortunately, not on the whole series, but certainly on Colin Baker.
Well, yeah, it sealed the fate, and it more or less, I think, sealed the fate on the series as well. Doctor Who, from the cancellation, is really being treated badly by the BBC.
It's kind of in the sights.
Yeah.
And publicly as well, there's an awareness that big names at the BBC are gunning for it at this point.
I mean, season 24 isn't the most loved season. I still think there's some lovely elements to it, but I don't think it's great. I'm sure. The problem was it was improving a lot, and then boom.
It's weird to think if it hadn't been cancelled then would have sort of dribbled on through the 90s. I mean, it's hard to say, but whether it would have come back ever or in the way it did, it's just I don't know. You can't see the other path.
It's very difficult to speculate.
Mind Warp. We have Brian Blessed as King Yakarnos the Shouty.
Wonderful.
And the return of Nabil Shaban as Syl. This time accompanied by another of his species, Perry being at least she's not the object of lust for once. She's the object of brain lust. They want to put
Lord Kiv's
brain into her skull.
Consciousness. So. Lord Kiv is played by Mike from The Young Ones.
Okay. Yeah. It sees the end of the road for Perry initially seeming to be killed, and then that's retconned at the end of the story, and she's slightly, probably worse, married off to Brian Blessed's character, Yakarnos. It's that must be an interesting household with the shrill American and the shouty alien warlord. Woman. Well, I don't know, maybe she goes for shouty men. It's like she's sort of been the TARDIS with the Sixth Doctor, so
very true.
It's a sort of clumsy season at best, I think. It was a lovely kind of idea, just the execution of it didn't pan out. Then Colin was sacked. He was very much scapegoated for the failings of the season. Not his fault at all. But I
think it's interesting that, he's scapegoated, like you say, for the failings of the show, and in the same way I think that Jodie Whittaker is being scapegoated for a lot of the problems with Doctor Who at the moment. We know that it's in the writing. not with all episodes, but certainly last season more. Unfortunately, people only see the face of the show, so she tends to get a lot of the brunt of this. I mean, fans are more sort of, it's Chibnall, but, you know, the perception of the general public towards it, if they're not enjoying it, is who you go to blame. Well, you're going to blame the actor.
Yeah, well, hopefully not with the same result.
Definitely will not.
It's the end. But the moment has been prepared for.
9 times out of 10.
That's probably a good place to wrap up an episode then. Woohoo! Thank you for listening. If you've any feedback, questions, or if you're a lonely Cyberman, then we can be reached at randomizerpodcast@gmail.com.
And please follow us on Twitter at randomizerpod. In both cases, that's randomizer with an S, not a Z.
And this time our celebrity guest bit of paper holder is the skull of a Vok robot. Nah, it's shy, isn't it?